Well, we've been starting off the year with good foundational practice and tackling such topics as, what is a Buddhist? What's that mean? And what's that look like in my daily life if I'm on a path? And well, we had this brief summary of key points of a Buddhist path, and then the measure of having trained the mind. How do we know we're making progress? And some really nice fundamental things there, like I might be a little happier more times, and but fundamentally, that all Dharma, all the Dharma has one purpose, one primary purpose, and that's to lessen the grasping of self. So, do I have less grasping of this self? And so that's how we can measure. Are we making practice in our Dharma practice? Am I doing things that lead me to be more attached to this sense of self that doesn't exist, or less attached? And then fundamentally, there's a lot of practices, depending on different lineages and different traditions, that have methods to help us, become less self-grasping. But all of them have the components of ethics, training the mind, stabilizing mind, meditation, and then wisdom to understand the nature of what we actually are, and not the confused sense of self that we kind of box ourselves into. So I don't want to rehash all of that, but just the context, because we have some people here that haven't been here. We've been exploring this, and what's it look like to be a Buddhist, if that's what you want to call yourself, or not. Certain traditions have an actual ceremony that you go to when you take precepts. You take precepts, you become a Buddhist, you get a name, and others don't. And some people can go through that ceremony and not be very Buddhist. And some people can not even know what those ceremonies are and be very Buddhist, in terms of their practice, and how do they live and start to understand the nature of who they are. So there's a myriad of practices, and for our purpose, as our center kind of likes to embrace a wide range, it's nice to know what our options are and what a good practice is for you. So we've been exploring that, and one of the fundamental things that is just the ground is to remember the prison that we're in, because that's the tricky part. I can forget that I'm in a prison because it looks pretty cool. There's jacuzzis. I didn't know they had those in prison. There's ice cream and cake and sour cherry pie. And so at these times, it doesn't feel very much like prison. And so unless we really investigate, if we investigate the nature of how this mental emotional suffering I have is really self-created, I don't get to the root of it. So we kind of have spent some time trying to understand how the actual mental and emotional suffering I'm creating is really coming from me, not these events and the way things play out, and from a misperception of them and an exaggerated quality to them that leads to an attachment and a grasping, and this becomes the suffering. And so in order to observe that, we need to be mindful. We need to be present. In order to be present, we need to train our mind. So that's why we spend time meditating, such as we did just before we started here. So we can be present and aware. So there's a wide range of practices. And starting our day, if we were to start our day, and that's where we left off last week, taking this accurate assessment of our current situation. We have a rare and precious life right now, and we have it with all this opportunity right now. And we're in an environment where we have Dharma, and that we have resources that we can read and write, that we have all of the conditions ripened right now to wake up, to no longer suffer, to discover our nature. It's here, it's available, and very few human beings have such an opportunity. If we were to go through the scope of multiple lives, it'd say it's taken eons of lifetimes to have this opportunity. Whether we can embrace that thought or just look at this lifetime, we can see that there's very few humans that have the life that you have. Very few. And there's people with resources that can read and write, but they don't even have an interest in, the Dharma or waking up, or they're really caught up in their way of trying to succeed. And there's those who have resources that just don't quite have freedom even to explore different paths based on how they're raised and the conditioning. So we have it. We have teachings. We have a proven path. We have examples. We have role models and teachers, and we have these wide range of practices that are available and have been proven for thousands of years in various traditions. That is right here to help us. And we can forget all that as we plan the ski day. And then get really frustrated because I have to wait in line. It's not a powder day, man. It's only a foot. And we can, get caught up in embracing this worldly life and forget that this is such a rare opportunity to wake up, to use this life in a way that is meaningful, that can actually eliminate all that suffering, to find our true nature, our Buddha nature. So taking some time each morning to just reflect on that, and those are the 4 thoughts that we went through last time. The rare and precious life we have, its impermanent nature, the karma we create, the habits and tendencies, the way we imprison ourselves trying to find happiness in things that can't really provide it. And that last one was where we were at with understanding samsara, the prison we're in. And that's the hardest one. That's, I would say, from my experience, what makes someone a Buddhist is that point. Do I know that this is samsara? Do I know that, this very nature of this life, this existence, is fundamentally dukkha, that it's fundamentally flawed, that it's fundamentally not able in any way, shape, or form to provide me any lasting happiness? Do I know that? So renunciation then becomes the entry point. I'm talking about these 5 pathways, 5 mind pathways of a Buddhist, and the entry point is renunciation. That's when you start what they call the path of accumulation. And so the renunciation is not a renunciation of enjoying a jacuzzi. It's not there. It's a renunciation of delusional thinking, of grasping, of seeing myself as independent and separate from, of the delusion of grasping to a sense of self that just doesn't exist. And we talked about that earlier, is the difference between not self and no self. Not self and no self. And sometimes in Buddhism they'll use no self. But they're not saying there isn't some self. So it's kind of tricky. It's better to say not self. And that's what the Buddha taught, not self. In other words, we identify ourself with that which is not self. That's all. We identify me and mine with that which is not me and mine. It doesn't exist. There's no basis there. But it does. But there's something that's identifying with that. And so that's where, if you're in really sort of these Nyingma traditions, that one aspect is I create all this by grasping to me and mine, which is not me and mine. And the other half is I don't know who I really am. I don't know I have Buddha nature. I don't know that I already have all this, that I'm a Buddha nature, that I don't know who I am. We haven't woke up. And so that becomes the entry point, this understanding of how I create the suffering in my life through grasping, through the labels that I put on people and the environment that I live in and the habitual way I see and experience the world. And I just, out of that habitual way of seeing and experiencing the world, I start creating a personality and identity, and that thing is seeking happiness in all the wrong places. It's like a bad country song. Maybe it's a good country song. Probably would be a good country song, actually. Yeah, and so that's the key, I think, to becoming a Buddhist, is that we recognize we're in prison. We recognize that these things that we grasp to for pleasure can't really provide the lasting pleasure we want. We realize the exaggerated qualities. We realize how that creates suffering, not liberation. And we renounce delusional thinking, and we start embracing reality. I mean, fundamentally, that's what Buddhism is all about: reality, what's true. And so I think that's the entry point, really, for me. It's am I committing myself to embracing reality, to living accurately, understanding the interdependent nature of this experience, and which requires no faith. It requires a commitment to understanding the nature of things. And faith, this idea of faith, comes based on experience, exploration, and a real understanding, a realization that arises from it. And so that's something for me I particularly like about Buddhism. You don't have to believe in anything. You have to test things. You know, what's true? Where's my happiness come from? Where's my suffering come from? And we can drill down on that. So then we talk about these practices. What is it that we do as Buddhists that help us live more accurately, understand our nature, and stop grasping at delusional thinking and a delusional sense of self? And so that's where I think we trying to remember what we did last week, but that was so last week. And there was a potluck afterwards, so I was kind of caught up in that. I can remember that rather accurately. But we talked about, starting our day with the four thoughts, this accurate grounding in the nature of this opportunity that we call today, and this rare and precious life we have, and reminding ourselves about the opportunity that we have, and then make a commitment to be living more accurately. And so with that, the other piece is foundationally ethics. If we really want to get some realization, if we really want to discover who we are, if we really want a more balanced mind, well, we need ethical behavior. That's the foundation of all this. And that's found in many other traditions. So we commit ourselves then to this path, in the sense of developing an understanding that my unwholesome activities have actually created suffering, and my wholesome activities create less suffering, pleasurable. And the definition of wholesome and unwholesome is very simple. Unwholesome leads to unpleasant experiences, and wholesome leads to pleasant experiences. It's not, there's no thing in there judging all that. It's just the way it works. And so if we start to understand it, then we start to understand that. And we have to test it. Does your life get better if you engage in these unwholesome activities? Or does your life get better if you engage in wholesome activities? What happens? So, and I'm rehashing because, I've seen new faces. So if you're online, I know you know all this stuff. Maybe you'll teach me next time. But the idea is it doesn't happen in immediacy. It's over time, and that the way we evaluate our practices over time, can we look back, having engaged in these practices, being more ethical, more present, with less attachment. 6 months later, how are we doing? A year later, how are we doing? And you can start to understand, as you engage in things that are more wholesome, you just start having more pleasant experience. So we kind of covered that way that we actually create anger and resentment by validating that anger and resentment. I was listening to Tenzin Palmo. She's so skillful the way she says things. And but she makes a point. A lot of people think that it's anger and resentment that gets us in all the trouble. And she said the Buddha taught, actually that's fairly easy to deal with. Anger, not so hard to deal with. Because people don't want to have it. It doesn't feel good. So people are willing to do work. And she says, a lot of people, she says the most commonly asked thing she gets is, how do I, get rid of my anger? And said, she said, nobody's asking her how to get rid of their greed. They're not asking that, because the harder part is our attachment. That's where the struggle is. Because, I want to be free and happy, but, I want to keep my nice stuff and my little vacation and all that. I want to keep all this, but, I just don't want to, have these afflicted mental states. And so can you give me like a Dharma practice that, allows me to keep all this and then lets me feel better more often? And so she had this great story when she lived in a cave for about 12 years, and that's where she did her retreat. And she had this little patio, and below it, just this little place where she could grow things. She could have a little garden. She went out to, get that set up, and there had these, she wanted to put these little flat things, rocks out there, flat rocks, so she can walk out there. And these little beautiful flowers would pop up, just these little sprouts. And she said they were really beautiful. And she thought, well, I'd better get rid of those so I can lay these on, or it's going to be lumpy. So she went to pull it out and couldn't pull it out. And so she went and got a pickaxe, and she's digging it up. And, basically she dug up the whole thing. It's just this massive root system underneath there. And she goes, this is what attachment is. It looks like this nice little flower. And it looks so pleasant. But underneath that we don't see, is this incredible root system that has just entrenched us. And it looks so innocent, this little flower. And I thought, what a great analogy, because that we don't see. And that, I think, is that understanding of samsara, recognizing, the actual suffering in attachment. Because it looks pretty good. It feels pretty good. Until it doesn't. Until it doesn't. Because anything we're attached to is automatically going to create pain. But if we're not attached, if we can really be present with the experiences in a non-attached way, we're actually able to be with it, more engaged, more loving, more kind, more accurately. But as soon as attachment comes in, whether it's a relationship, or since my friend Brad's here, or ice cream, whatever it is, they're suffering. They're suffering when I don't get it. They're suffering when it's not the way I want it. They're suffering when things don't show up, or I lose it, or whatever. As soon as there's grasping and attachment, they're suffering. It's that root system. So this is very deceptive and easy to forget. But if you start to observe it in real time, and you do it consistently over a period of time, you stop becoming deceived. You recognize this is suffering. This is samsara. This is dissatisfaction. And it's very clear. But we can't see that without some consistent ability to observe it in real time, to observe my impulse arise, to observe the desire arise, to observe what it's like to not act on it, to not act on it, and to notice, wow, that just came and went. And now my mind wants something else. And guess what? That didn't satisfy me either. And then I got exactly what I wanted. And then how long did the happiness last? 3 minutes, 4, what did I get? And then my mind's like, and then I got exactly what I want, and I'm really happy, and then I want to keep it, and now I'm worried about it. I have a safe upstairs where I can keep my treasures. I actually do have a safe upstairs. Legal stuff, right? But if we don't really observe it, there's no way to get that realization, because we just are so habituated to just wanting to feel good. And I know I can do this thing and I can feel good for a minute or 2 or 3. And then my mind can go to, how can I do that more? And guess what? Unfortunately, I do not have the ability to have all these circumstances provide me more when I want it on demand all the time. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of people who don't have a job right now because we can't keep the government open, right? We have no control over all that. And the hook is that I keep trying to control all that to make me happy. Did you come out because there's a question? Okay, we have a question from online.
It's from Michelle. It says, how to manage our attachment, because a degree of attachment is necessary to be a parent of children or to be a caring child to aging parents.
An excellent question. And hopefully those of you online heard it. But so the question was, how do we manage attachments? And the hypothesis is that you actually would need some attachment to be a good parent or to children, or to be a good caretaker of your parents. And that is a hypothesis, and that's where I would suggest that that's where we might want to investigate the hypothesis. And just understand the definition of attachment. So in this case, when we're talking about attachment, so in other cultures, when they use the word desire, for example, there's many different desires. There's many different words for love. And in the United States, we don't have those subtle distinctions. You love your mom, but you love your romantic partner. Well, it's a very different kind of love, right? And other cultures have different words for that. And they have other words that we translate to attachment, and they have other words like around desire. Like, isn't a desire to be a really good mom healthy? Well, of course. Isn't the desire to help others really helpful? Yes. And then you read in Buddhism that desire is the source of all suffering. So that's where I think the problem is how we parse the word attachment or desire. And so when we're talking about attachment, we're really talking about from a Buddhist perspective, it's already diluted, it's already confused, and it's already exaggerated, and it's attached to this needs to be a certain way, and it has these qualities. So it's coming from a sense of confusion. Rather, wouldn't it be, could you be an extremely good parent if you had endless amount of love and kindness for your child, and then endless amount of compassion, whether for your parents or for your child, or actually for the matter, why is it got to be limited to your child? Right? What would it be like to have that kind of love? And that kind of love is not attached at all. it doesn't need things to feed you a certain way, because it doesn't need to turn out a particular way. Uh, a love that is without attachment, and that's, I'll go back to Robina Corton's quote, just because anytime I can use it, I throw it out there. Love never hurts. Attachment does. And if we love someone, if we really love someone, if we love them, we're willing to extend ourselves for their highest potentials to be fulfilled, for them to grow, to be well, to be healthy. The highest form of loving kindness, the way it shows up, is a commitment to the healthiest possible interactions, so that they can have their potentials, I can have mine. And it's a commitment to that health and well-being that provides lasting happiness, a genuine well-being. And there's need no attachment to have that happen. There needs to be a commitment to make that happen. And so often we confuse this idea of love, like we love someone, when in fact, and this we love, and this is not so much with children, but with our relationships. We love how they make us feel, specifically when they act in particular ways. And we don't love them so much when they don't make me feel that way. And I certainly don't love them very much when they act in other ways. And so do I love them, or do I love how they make me feel when they act in particular ways? And when they stop acting, I hate them. So I never really loved them at any point. I was loving this feeling that I get from being around them when they act in particular ways. And so that's a totally different kind of confused type of love. And that's why I think it's so important to clarify these things. And with children, you generally don't have those. I mean, we do sometimes when, I'm a parent and a grandparent, and I was a single parent. And that commitment to really wanting my daughter, my philosophy personally was nurtured in independence. Nurtured in independence. And so I really made a commitment to try to be a healthy, loving father. And I just wanted her to know that she was loved. I just felt, I used to be a counselor, and and this is again me, so count it or not count it. I have just found in my personal experience in the counseling world that if a child knows that they're valuable and worthy and lovable, that's the greatest gift to parent. That's good parenting. They can screw up, they can make mistakes, but if they fundamentally have that sense that their parents love them, without question, I think that they have, it's good parenting. And that means that I grounded her. That means that I held her accountable. And she got to come to work with me because she was grounded. And she got to reflect, but it was never malicious, and it was never anything with the highest wish for her to really grow into the person she could be. And when she turned 18, she went to college, and she has not come back. She was nurtured independence, and she's a mom, and I'm a grandparent, and we have a good relationship. And she would want me to go visit her college and stay with them, and it was awesome. And I noticed that there were some parents, like most parents, who were calling their kids like, every other day, and when you coming home for Thanksgiving, and there's a sort of attachment to how their kids should be, and hard to let them go. And in my case, it was a different dynamic. She was inviting me there and calling me, and would have to leave her dorm to get to a quiet place to call me. And I thought, well, that was an honor to have her want me to come up there. And but college kids, man, they're up all night. I was in bed at 10. They're getting ready to go out. Anyway, so hopefully that's helping you with your question, is that what we want to do is manage the attachment in terms of understanding the difference between attachment and love, the difference between attachment and compassion, the difference between attachment in terms of how I can interact in a healthy way. Because when I'm not attached to how they should be or how things should be, I can be fully present to how things are. And then I can be more skillful in the way that I interact with offering the best environment for the people I'm with. And that can't be done. The moment I put attachment on there, I'm limiting that opportunity. So hopefully that was helpful. Any other question? I'm just going to pause. Give me a chance to sip water there. Yeah, one practice that's really powerful, and I like to think of this more in terms of cultivating equanimity is, and I'll say it, that we want to expand. Like loving kindness isn't concerned with just my family, me and mine, just my friends. Expanding that loving kindness, that compassion to all others, to all beings. And so with equanimity, we can see the value in every human being, and you can recognize that every sentient being has value, has Buddha nature, is trying to find happiness, trying to avoid suffering. And why wouldn't I love them as much as I love my grandchildren? Why shouldn't I love you and care about you as much as I love my grandchildren, simply because they're my grandchildren? And I don't have an answer to that. I think I should. I'm not there yet, and you don't get an allowance, but there's a different set of responsibilities, obviously, for your children, right? We have a different level of responsibility and engagement. But that doesn't mean that I can't bring that same understanding of level of care and concern for you and commit myself to the healthiest, most loving, kind interactions that I can have with you, because you're valuable, because we're all somebody's children, we're all somebody's grandchildren, we're all somebody's brother and sister, and we're all interrelated. And it's really to my grandchildren's benefit that you're healthy and well and happy, because the world's a safer place then, and they're in a safer place then. And when people are not that way, there's a lot of pain and suffering that carries its way into the world that we live in through, addictions and robberies and violence and depressions. And so what if we really understood that? And again, that's bringing our mind back to reality. There's no inner peace found in tending to the needs of me and mine. As soon as there's me and mine, there's you and yours. we got a problem. But there is inner peace found in tending to the needs of we and ours, understanding the interdependent nature of this world that we live in. So if we just talk about this once a week, it's hard to get that. But if we take some time every morning to bring this accurate assessment of our current situation, to remember what a rare and precious opportunity this day is that will never come again, and to make a commitment to start watering the seeds that lead to more understanding, the conditions of ethics that give rise to less suffering in my life, to understand that, and test the hypothesis, because Shanti would say, you don't need someone to give a divination. You don't need a clairvoyant person in your life. You don't need to go to some high master to tell you what you were in your previous life or what you'll be in your next. If you want to know what your previous life was like, you look at your life now. And if you have this rare and precious opportunity, you did pretty good. And if you want to know what your future life would be like, you look at your life now. What are you doing? Because you're creating it. So there's no real mystery here. It's not complicated, but it bears investigation to understand. And out of our delusion and habitual thinking, we just live in delusion so often that we keep watering the seeds that lead suffering as we're trying to find happiness. And so Shantideva would say, it's straightforward. It's just so simple. You know, all this suffering comes from unwholesome activities, and all this inner peace and well-being comes from wholesome activities. It's that simple. It's just that simple. So what if I woke up every day and I remembered that? And then I trained my mind so I can be more present with that. And then I started to try to bring that way of being in the world, just that simple verse right there. I want to be more wholesome. I want to be more ethical, have more well-being. And so I want to stop watering the seeds that lead to anger, and I want to start watering the seeds that lead to wisdom and compassion. And we just start doing that. And if I start doing that regularly, and that's, I think, where we were left off, I can start to notice when I do things that are not very wholesome. A lot of, the way I reacted, I yelled at someone, whatever I did. Then in the evening, we can purify that. We can purify those negative, afflictive states that we're creating. And so Geshe Gelsen, who's up there on your right, Venerable Geshe Gelsen, these lamas, they just make it sound so simple, I guess it's simple, it's just not easy. Maybe that's the way to put it. They go, okay, so now that you know, okay, because we told you, it's real clear, unwholesome activities, these 10 non-virtuous, the top 10 list, non-virtuous act. If you stop doing those, okay, you're going to be happier. You're going to stop creating that problem. So stop doing those. Stop lying, cheating, stealing, sexual misconduct. Stop doing these things that create suffering. Stop harming others. Stop, gossiping about people and slandering, all that. Stop doing that. You stop doing it, okay? And then start doing these. These are the 10 virtuous ones, Let's be more authentic, more honest, more kind. Let's engage in how we build harmony. So let's do those. So, okay, so we got it. Your suffering comes from these. Stop doing those. Your inner peace only comes from these. Start doing those. Okay, and we're good. And if by chance you messed up somewhere during the day, at the end of the day, well, purify those unwholesome activities. And that's the practice. It's so straightforward. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to remember this interdependent nature of things and my confused way of thinking. I'm going to try to be more accurate, and I'm going to start engaging in ways that water the seeds of compassion and well-being, because it feels better, if nothing else. And I'm going to stop doing these things that create suffering. And if I'm mindful during the day, I'll check in on that. So I just found my old check-in list. I used to check in my early training before I was monastic. I would check in 6 times a day. So I had my precepts, and I would check in. I would put in my vows, and so every 2.5 hours I would stop and I would check in. How am I doing with this vow? And so it was 2004, and I found my old journal of what I was struggling with. And at that time, what I discovered when I did that, I had a really clean record of how I'm doing with the list. And in the evening, I could purify the negativity. So I'd go, okay, here's what I struggled with. And it's interesting. It was inspiring to see what I was struggling with in 2004. So that 15 years ago, right? 15 years ago. I have not made any progress at all. Maybe I'm on the wrong path. But what I really saw was my rigor in it. I was really committed to it. And so it was inspiring. So I actually dusted it off and got rid of a lot of stuff. But I kept a few pages. I kept a few to remind me of that. And And so I've started using that again. So that so when I check in now, I'm using that little journal. And what's happened actually, in truth, is that by engaging that, really, I think 2000, let's just say 2000, so about a little over 18 years. My life, I have, I'm just a lot more peaceful, a lot happier, a lot less suffering, and I'm not around people that that I find really annoying or violent or that. And I used to live in that world quite a bit, and now I don't. And I don't know that people changed a lot, but I know I have. And so that's how this works, is that as I change my karmic imprints, as I change my habitual way of seeing others in the world, and as I engage in more wholesome activities and purify the negative ones, my whole experience of the world changes. And I don't have to change all of you, which is good because you're not very cooperative. And that's the problem, because we're trying to change all of that. And we don't really understand the dynamic. And the dynamic is I change this. It's an inside awakening. And as I change the karma, situations don't change. I mean, I still had been homeless, still had accidents, still had all those things happen. But the way I relate to it, perceive it, and how it affects me is different than it used to be. My life didn't get all rosy, but I'll tell you what, my level of well-being did, in spite of what I've had to face, whether it's a single parenting or all those things that we do, or accidents or hospitals or deathbeds or all those things, because all those still happen. But the key is I don't expect they shouldn't happen, because that's the biggest delusion that creates suffering, is I don't think I should have problems. I mean, when you get right down to it, I don't think it should be like this. That's why I'm unhappy. Did you have a question?
I was just wondering what you guys were doing to purify.
Yeah, well, I threatened to talk about that this week, because we ended last week on that. But I usually get right up to the end and they say, next week we'll cover that. But I did just briefly go through it, so, and I think we have time just to, again, briefly go through it. And it's not complicated. That's the thing, and it makes sense, and it's rational, and it's logical. And so they have 4 opponent powers. So in the evening, to apply these 4 opponent powers, there's a beautiful ritual around it, like a Vajra Sattva practice, but there's just these 4 elements that are very, very clear. And one of them is to have an intelligent regret. So there are R's, 4 R's is the way I use them. Regret. So at the end of the day, I kind of looked at, I've got my journal, I looked at, oh yeah, wow, I did that again. And I take a little time, I reflect on it. Here's what I did. And then an intelligent regret is not a Western mindset of self-critical, shaming, critical mind, like I am a bad person. An intelligent regret says, yeah, I'm still delusional and human, and I'm confused, so I'm going to make mistakes. So I see that I acted in this way, and I hold it and I go, how does this create suffering in my life? How is this blocking me from progressing, from being a better human being, having good relationships? How does this harm myself and others? How is doing this harming me? And just really shed light on it, recognizing this is really harmful to me and others. It's keeping me from being the person I want to be, engaged in a life that's on a path. And you see it real clear. You bring real light to it. And then we call it reestablishing a relationship or refuge, but just reconnecting with reality. Reconnecting that I'm not the center of the universe. I'm an interdependent being, and the nature of reality itself. And we call it establishing a refuge and a relationship with reality. And you go, this is not in accordance with this. And so seeing this with regret, reestablishing this relationship with reality, refuge. Well, I make a resolve to not do it again, to the best of my ability. It's like confession, I used to go to Catholic confession. Yeah, actually, I don't know if I told him I wouldn't do it again in there. I just told him I did it, and I got my thing. But I said I was sorry. That's part of it. But it's very much that dynamic. It's a great dynamic. Confession is a hugely empowering dynamic. I address and I recognize what I did that was harmful. I establish this intelligent regret, and then I resolve not to do it again. I make this commitment. And so with all this imagery with the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, we can just let them know, hey, thank you for being there, and I am making a commitment to not do this again to the best of my ability for as long as possible. Now, some of these things you'll do again, so you don't want to make promises you can't keep. And so the traditional way this is taught, boy, I hope this doesn't go on the internet. The traditional way this is taught is that you make a commitment. If you cannot do this for the rest of your life, make that commitment. If you think you could, maybe for a year or for a week or whatever, you just say, I'm not going to do this for that period of time, make it a real firm commitment. I don't like to lie to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and all that, or to myself. So I kind of phrase it as, I'm going to make a firm resolve to do my very best to not engage in that behavior again for as long as possible, to the best of my ability. And, I can commit to that. Because I don't know if I'll be doing it in 10 minutes, but I'm going to try not to. And make that resolve. And then the fourth R is a remedial activity. So I'm going to do something very merit-oriented to offset the negative karmic imprint. I'm going to do something really helpful, but not just generally helpful, but really in a way that's going to help cultivate some real merit and wisdom in my life. And so there's a lot of activities that you can do that are a remedial activity to remediate that. The most powerful one, though, which very few people do, is meditation on emptiness, meditation on the nature of reality itself, because that's the thing. I mean, that is the thing that eliminates all this, is recognizing the nature of reality. So that's a really powerful one. But you could take a mala and say, I'm going to, do these prayers for all sentient beings, or I know people that are struggling and sick and suffering, and so I'm going to be doing this as a so it could be doing some malas, and there's a Vajrasattva mantra that's very common that people do. You could use Chenrei Sig, Om Mani Padme Hum, so forth, or Medicine Buddha for people that are suffering, and really dedicate that for the benefit of others. So it's kind of a real nice way to wrap up a day. And heard this saying. It was a counselor I was talking to. She's big on this idea of sleep hygiene. Like we do teeth hygiene, basic hygiene. But a lot of people don't know how to go to sleep. Like a lot of people, our minds are so busy that maybe I can pass out now, or you go to bed and you got all this stuff going on and you can't. And she was really talking about really creating rituals that help you go to sleep, or sleep hygiene, that you can clear the slate for the day, where you can prepare for bed and you can go to sleep. This is one of those practices. In Christian tradition, a lot of people will pray, right? They'll do the knees and they'll do these nice prayers, and they'll do a thing, and you set a ritual, and then you can find yourself go to sleep much easier because you don't have all that stuff rolling around. So a practice like this in the evening, which doesn't take long, is really nice to take time and reflect, and then you wind up doing some prayers, and then you dedicate all of the wholesome things, all the things that I did well. We dedicate that for the benefit of all beings. So that's sort of a traditional practice. I wake up in the morning, I meditate, I set my motivation, my bodhicitta, to be, on this path to help all beings, that I'm dedicating my time to wake up, to recognize my nature, to stop creating harm, and to bring that motivation into my interactions and be mindful of them, noting what's healthy and unhealthy, what's wholesome, not wholesome. And then at the end of the day, pretty simply purify the ones that are not very skillful and dedicate the benefit to all sentient beings for those. And it's a very clear practice. It's a real nice way of engaging the world. And you generally find that you sleep better and you wake up lighter. And over time, you start experiencing the world very differently. So that's the purification practice. And if anyone would like just a little outline of that, just email us at admin@wocompassion.org, just through the website. And we're happy to email you just a nice little description of the 4 opponent powers. The whole thing with this is delayed gratification. We're just not usually very good at being uncomfortable or unsatisfied. And this takes time. Let us dedicate the merit and the wisdom that we have accumulated here today and throughout our lifetimes. We dedicate this for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be free of suffering, find their liberation, be free of samsara. And may we be able to use the merit and wisdom accumulated here today and throughout our lifetimes to purify our own minds, to help us recognize our own Buddha nature, for us to wake up, to achieve enlightenment, not merely for ourselves, but for the benefit of all sentient beings.